Hey everybody, for this week's shoutout I wanted to talk a little bit about Lord of the Rings War in the North. So this is a game that I feel has been overlooked a bit. It came out near the end of 2011 when a bunch of other high profile AAA games were coming out. And as you can see, I've actually completed this game, so I'm not talking about it in the sense of someone who's played it for a few hours and not looked at it again. I've actually beaten the campaign in co-op and really felt that it was one of the better co-op experiences of the past year and deserved to be called to your attention. So in the game you play as one of three predefined characters. You've got a ranger, a dwarven warrior, and an elvish magic user. And as you might expect in a game that's basically built from the ground up to be cooperative, each of the characters have various skills and abilities that complement one another. So the premise of this game, as illustrated by this introductory cutscene, is that you and your mini-fellowship are on a quest that parallels that undertaken by the main characters in the Lord of the Rings novels/movies. And that means that those of you who are familiar with said stories will recognize a lot of familiar locations and characters and concepts. However, if you've never seen Lord of the Rings, if you've never read the books, if you've never played any of the other games, that doesn't mean that there's not fun to be had here, and it doesn't mean that you're really going to be missing out on much, because there's enough exposition and there's enough of a foundation in this game alone for you to understand what's happening. So here we see one of the various checkpoints that you'll find throughout the game. These are basically meant to act as gates that prevent co-op players from getting too far ahead of each other. They work very effectively in that capacity, and they also provide opportunities for the game to load in new assets as you move from one area to another. So just to be clear, this isn't a roaming, vast open world game. This is more of a series of levels tied together by an overworld map. Although some of the levels do get fairly broad and sprawling and have things like secret areas in them, there is a degree of linearity to this game, which may or may not be a turn-off to some. I actually found it to be kind of enjoyable in the sense that you never really get lost. You never really have to wonder too much about where you're supposed to be going next, but there is opportunity for exploration here and there and to find some neat little side venues within some of the larger levels. So as you can see here, the combat in the game is fairly straightforward. When you first start playing, you're going to have a lot of light, heavy comboing for melee fighting, and a lot of simple readying your weapon and shooting for ranged combat. Now, as you advance through the game and you acquire new skills and abilities, that's going to flesh out a bit, but the pick up and play aspect here is pretty solid in the sense that within a few minutes of playing the game, you'll have a pretty good sense of how the basic combat works and be able to repeat that fairly effectively. Now, I'll get into some other nuances of the combat in a moment, but first let's take a look at some of the double glazings that you would expect to see in an RPG-ish action game. We have basic attributes such as strength and stamina that you can dump generic points into, and we also have specific skill points that access the various character-specific skill trees. Each character has 3 different skill trees that they can dump these points into, and unsurprisingly each one of them focuses on a different aspect of combat, be it melee, ranged, or magic/special attacks. This is slightly important in the sense that each character has a built-in strength, the ranger being the most well-rounded of the 3, but the dwarf being stronger at melee, weaker at ranged, and the magic user being stronger at ranged, weaker at melee. as you might imagine, these skill trees allow you to either further emphasize those strengths and weaknesses or attempt to balance them out. So here we have the first major encounter in the game. This is where you really first come across a group of enemies that's fairly sizable in number. And this gives us a pretty good opportunity to show off some of the nuances of the combat system. As you can see here, the dwarf is up front engaging in melee. I'm plinking away at these goblins with arrows until I run out, and I'm able to actually then switch it up and immediately engage in melee. Now you might notice that as I first start playing in this sequence, I'm kind of whiffing a bit with some of these hits and overcommitting to some of my combos and kind of missing my targets a bit. I kind of credit that to a subtle nuance in the combat system, that being that it's a bit rhythmic and a bit timing based, and what it really necessitates is that you spend a little time with it getting a feel for exactly how your character moves, engages targets, moves from one target to another, and commits to his various attacks. There is a bit of a tendency for animation priority in this game, meaning that if you hit a few attack buttons, your character will kind of commit to those attacks and want to finish them before moving on to something else. However, if you time things just so, it's pretty easy to break in and out of those animations at will and move from one character to another or one enemy to another pretty seamlessly. There's just a little bit of a timing element to it that's really difficult to articulate, but once you actually play the game, you'll see what I mean. And the good news is, after about 15 or 20 minutes with it, you'll develop a pretty good sense for when you need to move, when you need to hit the various attack buttons to achieve the desired result. So another really interesting mechanic is this healing bubble, which the elf mage character gets as one of her special abilities. This is a very key ability, especially later on in the game, because it not only heals any characters that are standing inside of it, but it protects them from ranged attacks, which become quite prevalent and numerous as the game moves on. So if you are playing this cooperatively, which I highly recommend, it's very important for whoever is playing as the mage to invest some of those special skill points into that bubble shield ability so that it can be as effective as possible and used as frequently as will be needed. To sum things up, Lord of the Rings: War in the North is a really great game. It may not be the most broad, sweeping, or technically impressive game out there, but what it does exceptionally well. And it provides, in my opinion, one of the best three-player co-op experiences in recent memory. I was actually shocked when I was capturing the footage for this little video here at how fun this game is, even playing through it a second time. And I would highly recommend that anybody who finds this even remotely interesting go and check it out. It's currently available on Steam, normally for $20, and even more deeply discounted on the current Steam summer sale. I know that it's also available for the Xbox 360 and the PS3, though I cannot speak specifically to the quality of those particular versions of the game. I suppose that they are probably at least comparable to the PC version, but needless to say, I've found this to be a very satisfying and worthwhile game, and just wanted to share it with those of you who might be interested in something like this. So I'm going to let this video play out, but just remember, don't screw with eagles, because that never leads to anything good for anyone concerned. And if you free them when they're being screwed with, good things can happen. Peace!